When someone ghosts you or lies to you, it can feel like the most personal kind of rejection. You start to replay every conversation, every message, every smile. You ask yourself what you missed, what you did wrong, whether there was something about you that made them suddenly disappear. It's confusing, painful, and honestly, it's humiliating. You gave your time, your attention, maybe even your heart, and they gave you silence. Or worse, they gave you words that weren't even real. And the natural instinct is to internalize all of it, to make their behavior mean something about you, that you weren't good enough, that you were too much, that you said something wrong, that maybe you cared too early or asked for too much. But here's the reality. It wasn't about your worth. It was about their capacity to show up, their capacity to tell the truth, their capacity to communicate with clarity and maturity, their capacity to handle emotional intimacy, their capacity to give what you are ready to give. And that capacity has nothing to do with your value. It has everything to do with the emotional limits they're working with. And often those limits are hidden in the beginning. People show you their charm, their confidence, their sweet side. They say the right things, make the right moves, mirror your energy just enough to keep your hope alive. But that's all it takes, just enough. Just enough attention to keep you engaged, just enough compliments to keep you hopeful, just enough moments of vulnerability to make you believe it's real, until suddenly it's not. And the withdrawal isn't gradual, it's jarring. They vanish, or they lie, and you're left with a mess you didn't create and questions you can't answer. What you don't realize in that moment, because your mind is busy trying to solve a puzzle that's built on missing pieces, is that their behavior was never a response to your worth. It was a reflection of their own emotional bandwidth. Some people ghost because they're too immature to say they're not interested. Some lie because they want the benefits of your connection without the responsibility of honesty. Some are operating from fear of confrontation, fear of commitment, fear of being seen. And when they run, it's not away from you, it's away from their own discomfort. But the problem is, when you've been ghosted or lied to, it doesn't feel like it's about them. It feels like it's all about you, because you're the one left behind. You're the one who cared. You're the one who thought it was going somewhere. You're the one with the empty silence on your phone screen. But you're not the problem. You were available, you were honest, you were emotionally open, and when someone lacks the capacity to match that, it doesn't lower your value, it exposes their limitation. And here's what people rarely say in the moment you need to hear it most. You didn't misread everything, you didn't make it all up. There were real moments, real chemistry, real connections. But you can have real connection with someone who is still emotionally unavailable. You can have genuine chemistry with someone who isn't equipped to build anything sustainable with you. We assume that because something felt real, it must have the potential to last. But feeling real and being real in the sense of long-term compatibility are two very different things. One belongs to the spark, the other belongs to stability. Some people can give you the spark, but they cannot, will not stay for the stability. And that's the hard part, because you might have seen their potential, you might have imagined what it could be, and now you're left holding an image in your mind that no longer matches your reality. But instead of grieving what it wasn't, you start questioning yourself, you start trying to fix yourself, to overanalyze and repackage your entire personality just to avoid this kind of pain again. But the truth is, someone else's inability to stay isn't your cue to shrink. It's not your cue to change who you are. It's a moment that asks for awareness, not self-blame. What part of you chose to overlook the early signs? What part of you wanted so badly for it to work that you didn't ask the harder questions? Not because you're flawed, but because you were hopeful, because you led with trust. And trust is not a weakness. It's a strength that got placed in the wrong hands. We think if someone ghosts us, we must have been forgettable. If they lied, maybe we weren't worth the truth. But those thoughts are lies themselves. They're narratives that your pain is feeding you, because the human brain craves reasons. And when someone vanishes without giving you closure, your mind creates its own version of the story, one that puts the blame on you, because it gives you something to control. If it was your fault, at least it makes sense. At least then, next time, you could do something different. But sometimes it wasn't anything you did. Sometimes they simply couldn't meet you where you were. And rather than admit that, They chose the coward's route, disappearing, lying, avoiding, deflecting. They chose that not because you're unworthy, but because they're unequipped. And there's something strangely powerful about seeing that clearly, about separating who you are from how they treated you. You don't need to turn cold. You don't need to stop trusting. You just need to get better at recognizing capacity, not charm, not potential, not surface level compatibility, capacity, the emotional maturity to be clear, the presence to be consistent, the courage to be honest. And once you start focusing on that, you stop blaming yourself for what someone else lacked. Because now, instead of asking, what was wrong with me, you start asking, why did I overlook what was missing in them? That's where your power begins. When you stop treating their disappearing act as a judgment on your value and start treating it as a reflection of their emotional ceiling, one you were never meant to be trapped under. When someone ghosts you or avoids telling you the truth, it's tempting to minimize it, to say, maybe they were just overwhelmed, maybe they didn't want to hurt me, maybe they didn't know what to say. We rationalize the silence because the alternative is harder to accept. That they didn't respect us enough to offer clarity, that they didn't care enough to close the loop, that they weren't willing to sit in the discomfort of honesty, even for a moment, in order to give us the basic dignity of understanding what went wrong. But here's what we often overlook in those situations. Silence is not neutral. It is not passive. It's not simply the absence of a message. It is a message. When someone disappears, they are saying something loud and clear without words. And what they're saying is, I am not invested enough in your experience to be transparent with you. We like to think that silence is the polite alternative, that not saying anything is somehow better than a direct, potentially hurtful truth. But clarity is a form of kindness, even if it stings, even if it disappoints, even if it ends something we were hoping would begin. Because at least with clarity, we can breathe. We can move on. We can process what's real instead of spinning in circles trying to decode mixed signals, vague responses, or complete silence. Clarity is a gift. Silence is a burden. And yet, people choose silence all the time, not because it's right, but because it's easy for them. To look someone in the eye and say, I'm not feeling the same way, or I don't think I'm in the right place for this, takes effort, it takes courage, it takes emotional responsibility. Ghosting takes none of that. Ghosting is the emotional equivalent of running away from your own mess and leaving someone else to clean it up. And what hurts even more is that the person who disappears usually moves on as if nothing happened. They get to keep living their life while you're left stuck, wondering what it meant. Was there something I missed? Did I imagine the whole connection? Was it all just nothing to them? Those questions loop endlessly, not because you need the relationship to continue, but because the silence left you without closure. And when you don't have closure, your mind creates its own story. It fills in the blanks, usually in the harshest way possible. Maybe I wasn't attractive enough. Maybe I was too available. Maybe I scared them off. And these thoughts, these theories you invent in the silence aren't truths, they're wounds. Wounds caused by someone else's unwillingness to simply tell you the truth. And while that truth might have hurt in the moment, it would have spared you from weeks or months of self-doubt. That's the cost of silence. It doesn't protect your feelings, it steals your peace. It forces you to carry uncertainty in place of clarity, and that uncertainty becomes heavy. People think honesty is cruel, but dishonesty, especially by omission, can do far more damage. At least when someone tells you where they stand, you have something solid to stand on too. It may not be what you wanted, but it's something you can build on. You can rebuild your confidence, your boundaries, your sense of trust, because you're working with truth. But when someone says nothing or lies by pretending to feel something they don't, they rob you of that chance. You're left trying to fix a version of events that was never real to begin with. And that repair work, that emotional labor, that's not yours to do. We live in a world that's growing more and more comfortable with digital detachment. People end relationships with a disappearing act. They avoid difficult conversations by muting, blocking, ghosting, thinking that if they can't see the pain, it doesn't exist. But it does. It lives in the unanswered questions, in the messages that never got a reply, in the plans that were left hanging. And behind all that silence is someone who didn't have the strength or the care to finish the conversation they started. They initiated something, they opened a door, they stepped in just far enough to create an emotional investment, and then left without saying a word. That's not neutral, that's not harmless, that's not something to excuse. Because in doing that, they treated your time and energy as disposable. They didn't just walk away, they made the decision that your understanding wasn't worth the effort. And when you minimize that, when you say to yourself, well, maybe they were busy, or they probably didn't know how to say goodbye, you're making excuses for a form of emotional cowardice. Because even a sentence, one honest, clear sentence, is better than complete disappearance. And it's not about needing a big dramatic exit. It's about something basic. Respect. Respect for the fact that you gave your time, your trust, your attention, that you were vulnerable, that you were open to something real. That deserves acknowledgement, even if the connection didn't last. And when someone avoids giving you that, you don't owe them your grace. You don't have to keep protecting their image in your mind just because they didn't give you a final word. You can let their silence speak for them, because silence does speak. It says, I didn't care enough to explain. It says, your confusion wasn't my concern. It says, avoiding discomfort was more important than giving you clarity. And when you stop seeing silence as politeness and start seeing it as a statement, you stop chasing the people who deliver it. You stop hoping for the message that will suddenly make sense of it all. You stop waiting for the apology that's probably never coming. Because now you know the silence was their message. They just didn't say it out loud. The most agonizing part of being ghosted or lied to isn't always the loss itself, it's the confusion that follows. It's the days and nights spent analyzing every word, every interaction, every glance. It's the replaying of text messages in your mind, the scanning of conversations for hidden meanings, the endless search for a logical explanation that could make this feel less random, less cruel. You go down mental rabbit holes trying to reconstruct the timeline, wondering where things went wrong, what signal you might have missed, what detail could explain the sudden shift. But the truth is, the pain we carry isn't just about what happened. It's about trying to make sense of something that was never meant to make sense. That confusion is where we get trapped. When someone lies to you, they hand you a distorted version of reality. They give you a script that doesn't match the play. They say one thing, but act another way. They promise consistency and then vanish. They tell you they care, but disappear when you need them. And when that happens, your brain doesn't just absorb the pain. It starts working overtime to create coherence. It wants to reconcile the contradiction between their words and their actions. So you start adjusting your own understanding of events, bending the truth in your mind to fit the narrative they gave you. You think maybe they really were busy. Maybe they really were just scared. Maybe you were asking for too much too soon. You give them every benefit of the doubt while withholding the same grace from yourself. That's the part that messes with your sense of self the most. Not the moment they walked away, but the days you spend questioning your own judgment. The way you start to lose trust in your instincts. The way you stop believing that what you felt was real. You second guess your own emotional intelligence. Was I too sensitive? Did I misread the whole situation? Was I seeing something that wasn't there? And that kind of confusion is far more damaging than a clean break, because it doesn't just hurt, it lingers. It eats away at your ability to trust the next connection. It leaves residue that doesn't go away just because you move on. If someone had just told you the truth, no matter how disappointing it was, you could have grieved it and begun to heal. But lies create illusions, and illusions take longer to recover from, because you're not only grieving the loss, you're untangling yourself from a version of reality that was never true in the first place. That takes time. It takes strength, because it requires you to admit that what you were building emotionally wasn't grounded in something real. Not because you were naive, but because someone else was dishonest. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because the moment you accept that, you also have to accept that your feelings were based on fiction. Not that your feelings weren't real, but that they were directed towards something that wasn't. And when that realization hits, there's grief. But it's not the clean kind of grief that comes from losing something you loved and understood. It's messy, it's layered, because you're not just mourning the relationship or the connection. You're mourning the fantasy, the hope, the future you thought was possible, the version of this person you believed in, and in that process, you come face to face with the most frustrating truth of all, that the thing keeping you in pain isn't even the person, it's the lack of clarity they left behind. We're told to look for closure, to find peace in understanding what happened. But how do you find peace when the other person never gave you the full story? How do you close the door on something that ended without explanation? That's where people get stuck. In the pursuit of answers, in the hope that maybe one more message, one more conversation, one more sign will finally make it all make sense. But it rarely does, because people who ghost or lie often don't even understand themselves well enough to explain their actions to you. They're not operating from a place of deep reflection. They're reacting from avoidance, fear, and immaturity. So waiting on them to give you clarity is like waiting for a broken compass to show you the way. You'll keep walking in circles, and every step will take you further from your own peace. That's why the most powerful thing you can do isn't to find every answer. It's to stop making confusion the price you pay for caring. You don't need to untangle every contradiction to move forward. You don't need to fully understand why someone was willing to lie or disappear. What you need is the willingness to accept that some people will choose the easy way out, even if it costs you your sense of security. And that decision is on them, not you. Their choice to lie, to ghost, to leave without explanation is not evidence that you're unworthy. It's evidence that they lacked the emotional integrity to match your investment. And once you see that, you stop needing the truth to come from them. You start creating your own. You decide that the truth is simple. Someone who valued honesty would have given it to you. Someone who respected you wouldn't have disappeared into silence or layered their intentions with half-truths. And that truth, as hard as it is, hurts less than the confusion you've been living in. Because at least now you're grounded in something real. Not comforting, not romantic, but real. And that's what you build your healing on. Not the fantasy, not the what-ifs, but the recognition that you deserved more. Not just more love or attention, but more clarity, more consistency, more truth. Because when you start holding truth as a non-negotiable, you stop entertaining people who offer anything less. You stop justifying confusing behavior. You stop filling in the blanks of someone else's silence with self-blame. And instead, you return to yourself with your dignity intact, your intuition sharpened, and your sense of peace no longer dependent on someone else finally explaining why they left. There's a moment after being ghosted or lied to when you begin to question your standards. You start to wonder whether you've been asking for too much. You think maybe this is just how dating is now. Maybe this is what people do. Maybe expecting someone to be direct, consistent, and respectful is a fantasy, not a baseline. And slowly, you feel your boundaries begin to erode, not because you want them to, but because you're tired. Tired of starting over, tired of being disappointed, tired of opening up only to be left with nothing but silence or betrayal. That fatigue starts to chip away at your resolve, and the dangerous thought creeps in. Maybe this is just what modern love looks like. But what if the problem isn't your standards? It's the normalization of bad behavior. What if we've gotten so used to emotional immaturity that we've started calling it normal? What if disappearing without a word has become so common that when someone does it, we barely flinch? We scroll through advice columns and social media posts that say things like, protect your peace, or they owe you nothing, as if cutting someone off without explanation is somehow a sign of strength. But real strength isn't in avoidance. It's in communication, in owning your truth and being able to deliver it, even when it's uncomfortable. And when you start to see that clearly, you stop mistaking silence for power. The mistake many people make after being ghosted or lied to is thinking they need to become colder to protect themselves. They confuse boundaries with walls. They start to play the same game. Be less invested, reply slower, care less. But playing a game doesn't protect you. It just makes you part of the same cycle that hurt you. You start building your dating strategy around avoidance instead of alignment. You avoid vulnerability, but you also avoid connection. You protect yourself from pain, but you also block the very intimacy you're looking for. And that's not growth, it's fear in disguise. There's a difference between protecting yourself and punishing yourself. When you lower your expectations in response to being hurt, you're punishing yourself for someone else's lack of emotional responsibility. You're taking their inability to meet your standard and using it as a reason to change your standard. But someone else's failure to show up the way you hoped isn't a reflection of what's realistic. It's a reflection of who they are. And if you let that dictate your future choices, you'll end up in connections that feel safer but are ultimately more shallow. You'll start choosing people based on how little they can hurt you instead of how deeply they can meet you. What no one tells you is that raising your standards doesn't mean making them impossible. It means making them specific. It means choosing clarity over charisma, consistency over chemistry, respect over intensity. It means paying attention not just to how someone makes you feel in the moment, but how they behave when things get inconvenient, uncertain, or vulnerable. It's easy to be charming when things are light and easy. But can they have a hard conversation? Can they be honest when their feelings change? Can they tell you the truth even when they know it might disappoint you? That's the standard that matters, and that standard is not too high, it's essential. People will tell you that ghosting is just a sign they weren't interested. But interest without respect isn't worth anything. You can be interested in someone and still be incapable of showing up for them in a meaningful way. You can feel something for someone and still not have the maturity to communicate it honestly. So don't let interest fool you. Don't let attention override integrity. And don't accept the bare minimum just because you're afraid of being alone. Loneliness is hard, but being connected to someone who treats you as disposable is lonelier. This is the moment where you get to decide whether your pain becomes your excuse or your turning point. You can use it as a reason to settle, to expect less, to give less. Or you can use it to sharpen your clarity about what you will and will not allow in your life. You don't have to become cold. You don't have to stop caring, but you do have to stop confusing pain with proof. Just because someone ghosted you doesn't mean no one ever will stay. Just because someone lied to you doesn't mean honesty is dead. But you won't attract truth by lowering your expectations. You attract it by holding to them even when it's hard. And yes, holding your standard will cost you something. It might cost you the company of people who want access to you but not accountability. It might mean walking away from almost relationships that feel close but never quite land. It might mean more alone time, more Friday nights where you choose peace over chasing. But what it won't cost you is your self-respect. What it won't take from you is your sense of alignment. And the more you say no to what doesn't meet you, the more room you create for what actually can. That space is where you meet people who are clear. People who don't vanish when things get real. People who don't confuse attention with affection. People who value consistency over games. But they can only find you if you've stayed in alignment with what you know you deserve, not what the world tells you is realistic, not what your past experience tries to convince you is normal, but what you know deep down is right. The problem isn't that your standard is too high. The problem is we've become too used to lowering it out of fear, out of impatience, out of loneliness. And the truth is, your standard is the only thing standing between you and another round of confusion, pain, and wasted time.